In this video, we're going to continue on with our long-term athlete dashboard project by setting up all of our filter pane, as well as outlining all of the headers for our charts and creating our first chart. So let's get after it. Okay, welcome back. And just to give you an update of how far we have come thus far, we have created our first part of our filters tab, as well as this dynamic athlete card where we can select different types of metrics and it will automatically show those metrics on our athlete card. And then we have set up all of our athlete info and our data and our admin panel. And if you would like to follow along with these videos, please go back to part 1 and start at the beginning. Now, as another quick reminder, if you are enjoying these videos, if you could like and subscribe to the channel, that would really help me out, as well as if you could share these videos with anyone you think would find them useful. So with all that out of the way, let's get after this project. So for today, what I want to do is outline all of this space here where we're going to actually be creating our filters. And the filters are used in dashboards so that we can change them and make them completely dynamic and display the information that we are looking for. So I've already built this a few times, so I know that there are a few key things that I want to put in here. Number one being, I'm going to put in a space where I can start to access all of my scoring criteria. So what I usually do here is I'll usually just color this black, and I'm going to merge these cells, and then in here we'll just give it a header, but score chart 1. And you can see we can't really see that, so I'm just going to make the text white, and I'll just center this there. So this is going to be our 3 areas for our score charts. And then in this box here, I'm going to give it a little border, but I'm going to have an option for us to be able to select our date. So the easy way to do this is if I select in this box here and go to data, data validation, and go to a list from a range, I'm going to enter a range or formula. I'll click there and go to my admin tab, and I'm just going to select this column B. And if I make this B2 all the way down to B, it's going to give me all of the dates that are in my database. And if I hit save, go back to my dashboard, I should be able to select any of those dates now. So that's going to be really important down the line as we start to build this out. Now, the next thing I want to do on this tab is I'm just going to add a space where I can put in my tests. I usually give this yellow color to anything that I want to make selectable, just so when people are interacting with the dashboard, they know what the areas they can play with are. So for this, test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4, and test 5 are all we're going to need. And then I'm just going to have a yellow area where we'll be able to select our performance test there. So I'll color this in all yellow. And then because this is a selectable area, I'm going to give this a little bit of a border, but I'm going to make it just a dashed line. And I think that looks pretty good. And I'll just center these and bold them. So that is our actual filter area. And if I just put a line around there, everything will look a little bit better. So I think that was a bit too thick. Let's just give it, that's a normal line. We'll give it a normal line, put the border all the way around. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good there as our score chart. So I'm going to copy this and just paste it down a couple more times for our other 2 score charts, because these are all going to be set up exactly the same. Now we'll just call this score chart 2 and 3. Now for our performance test, we're going to create a data validation in here. I'll highlight all these cells, go to data, data validation, list from range, and I will select from my admin panel all of my tests. We'll go C2 all the way down and hit OK. Same way we did with the dates. And when I go back to my dashboard, these should all be selectable now. Because how we set that up, I should just be able to copy and paste this a couple of times. So that is part 1 for setting up our scoring chart filters. And to continue this on, I'm just going to use this same sort of framework, but for the second set of filters, I already know what these are going to look like. So I'm going to just change these around. So the first one's going to be called Long-Term Chart 1. And just so I remember what kind of chart it is, I'm just going to type in bars, because usually the first chart that we create here are going to be bar charts. And then I'm going to set this up as metric 1, metric 2. And then down the side, we want start date, select metric, show test, and we want team average. And these are all going to be bolded as well. I'll bold those, and I'm going to create this area in yellow. And I'll just put in that sort of center border that is dashed to just separate those out a little bit. For metric 1, we're going to be always doing that one in like a blue color. So I'll just give that a light blue. And metric 2 is going to always be in like a red color. So I'll give that a light red and bold those and center them. So that's going to be our area where we select our different tests. Now for the date, it's going to be the same across both tests. So I can take this date that I've already selected, hit Control C, and then in here hit right click, paste special, and paste the formula only. Whoops, I should be able to paste, let's try the data validation only, sorry. And then if I just merge that, now we can select the date out of there. So that works really well. And then for show tests, or sorry, for team average, we're going to turn them on and off together. So I'll merge those two. For our metrics, I should be able to copy this one here, and underneath both of these, hit right click and paste data validation only. And now we can select our metrics. And then in these boxes here with the show test and team average, we're going to just put in a checkbox. So I'm going to be able to check those on and off. So this is how our filters are going to work. We're going to have select the start date, select the test that you want to see, and turn them on and off. And that's going to be all of the different things that we want. And if I center all of these, it'll look a lot better. Okay, so easy enough now. I'm just going to Control C and paste those down 2 more times and make this long-term chart 2 and long-term chart 3. And then for chart 3, we're going to make it line graph. So I'm going to call this line graph instead of bars. Okay, so those are our filters. And this area is going to be where we'll select all of our data. So now part 2, what I'm going to do is create the title bars. So from here, I will take basically row 17 and 18, merge and center them. And I'm going to stick a formula in here that allows me to show the title based on the test that I select. So what this is going to look like, I'll go up to my formula bar and I'm going to type equals. And the first thing we want to show is this is going to be for long-term chart 1. So we want to show the first metric, which is stored in B32. So we're saying equals B32, so bench 1RM. And then we want to put something with that. So I'm going to use the and symbol, quotations. Now anything we type in quotations will be shown as text. So I'm going to type space with space quotations and symbol and the other test. In this case, it'll be bench RM 1RM again. So right now it says bench 1RM with bench 1RM. And then I want some text to display the date. So I'm going to say and quotation space since double dots and space quotation, and then the last thing we want is the date, but I want it as a date format. So I'm going to type in text, open that up, and we'll do the date cell, so B31, and then comma, and it's going to ask me what the format I want that in, and I like it in year, month, date, or year, month, day. So I'm going to type quotations YYYY dash MM dash day day, quotation, close the whole thing off, and this is going to be our title. So it's bench 1RM with bench 1RM since 2021 01 06. And as we change these, say clean 1RM, because we're going to be showing two metrics at the same time on this chart, it'll say bench 1RM with clean 1RM since whatever date. So now it's just a matter of formatting this. So we'll give it sort of a dark blue color. I'm not sure if this matches the one up here. Hold on a sec. Maybe this dark blue. Nope, that's not the right one. Let's give it, oh sheesh, what color is that? Well, we'll stick with this one for now and I'll change it later. Some white text, and then what font were we using? We're using Arial. So I'll make it a bunch bigger, maybe 36. That's a bit too big. Let's say 24. I'll center it and maybe bold it. So that's going to be our title bar. So we have bench 1RM with clean 1RM since 2021 06. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lock these in with F4 and hit enter. It shouldn't change anything, but I'm going to copy this and paste it 2 more times to create my other headers. And I'll just have to switch sort of the references here. So instead of B32, now we want 40. So I'm going to just type in B40 and C40, as well as this one will be in 39. And then for the last one here, we want 48. So instead of 32 in our formula bar, we'll type in 48. 48. And the last one is in 47. So there are our header bars, and to check if those are working, if we change the dates and the tests, these should all change. So they seem to work pretty well to me. So then the next thing that I can do with this filtered bar is if I just take column A all the way over to E and then go to view and hit group, I should be able to group these columns. And what that does is gives me this little button up here at the top that I can use to basically open or close it down. So what I might want to do is if I'm printing the sheet or showing it to a coach, I close this down and then all they see is this dashboard. So they don't have anything to interact with, and I can print this out or show it to an athlete or something like that. Then if I want to interact with it, I would just open this back up and change all of the filters and things that I want. So that's a quick trick there. Now, the next thing we're going to do in this video is start to filter out some of the data based on our actual selections. So for this, I'm going to have to create one more tab, and I'm going to go to add sheet down here in the bottom left, and I'm going to call this one Dataviz Reference. And all that means to me is that this is the area where I'm going to start to do all of the calculations and things that I need for my Dataviz. So what I'm going to do on this sheet is just start to pull out the different values that I select so that I can create all of my charts. So from A1 all the way over to about G, I'm just going to merge and center this and call this Long-Term Chart 1. And then there's a few things that I'm going to want to pull out. So the first one being is athlete. The second one's going to be the position of the athlete. The third one's going to be the start date. The fourth one's going to be the test 1. And then I'm going to want test 2. Then min and max values. We won't do that today, but in a future video we will. And then what else I'm going to want is whether or not I want to actually show that test. So show test. Show test. And then from there, I'm going to want the dates, test 1, test 2. Okay, so I'm going to just color this in a little bit the same way as I do on the main dashboard tab. I'm just going to give these a black background. And then these will bold. And then these will bold as well. Okay, so I like to do it this way because I like to have all of the information easily for when I'm manipulating formulas down here. But you could easily do all of these references off of other sheets, but I just think it makes it a little bit more tedious. So the first thing we need is the athlete name. So that's easy to find. All I'm going to do is type equals, go to my dashboard tab, and we select the athlete name right here. So that's part 1. The position, we can do a VLOOKUP for the position. So I can type in something like equals VLOOKUP. We want to look up this athlete, comma, where do we want to look it up? In our athlete info tab. So I will select all of that data, and then I'm going to want to return the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th column. So I'll type in comma 5, comma false. Close that off, and it should return our actual position. Then for start date, easy enough. This is long-term chart 1. So I'm going to type equals, go back to dashboard, and this is going to be our start date right here. Enter. And then for test 1 equals dashboard, select metric 1, enter, and then test 2 equals dashboard, select metric 2. And then for our show test, that's going to be the checkbox. So I'm going to type equals dashboard show test 1, and that is true currently, and then equals dashboard show test 2. So those are all of our things that we're going to pull out today. Now the last thing is just writing a formula that based on these selections pulls out the data that we need. Now usually when we're creating these filter formulas, we'll use index max match and use a whole bunch of references, but I'm going to create some names for these references so that I can easily reference them over and over and over again. So going to my data tab, if I take this first row and then go to data and go to named ranges, so data row 1 to 1, we're just going to call that title. So titles. And this is just going to be all of the titles of our data tab. I'm going to hit done. And then part 2, what I want is A2. Okay. So basically I want A2 all the way to L whatever. So I'm going to add a range here, and we're just going to go data A2 to L, and that is going to be all of our data. So it's A2 all the way to L and then down for as far as we can, and I'm going to call this data and hit done. So I might have to just select this range, and I'll just call it A2 and hit OK, and then done. So we have two ranges: titles, which refers to our first kind of row, and then data refers to all of our data. And that's going to be really important when we start to create this reference here. So for our filter formula, the first thing we're going to want to do is type in equals filter, open this up, and we're going to put in the range that we want to search for, but we're going to look for a few different ranges. So what I need to do is put a curly bracket in here, and then the first range is going to be an index formula, and it's going to look like this. Index, open this up. The reference that we want to look is data. Okay, so you'll notice that is now a name. And comma, we want to match for the column. So I'm going to type in match, open this up, and we want to look for the word date under our titles. Okay, and then I'm going to hit comma, false, close this off, close that off. So what this is saying is I want you to index all of the data that matches date. So it's basically going to the date column and matching all of those values, and it's going to return those. Okay, now for our second one, what we want to do is pull out our first test. So after our comma, we'll start, I gotta close this off. After our comma, we'll start our next index. So it's going to be index, data, comma, match. And we're going to match for our first exercise. So our exercise is stored in B5, and I'm going to hit comma. I want to look for that in titles, and then comma, false. Close that off, close that off. And I'm going to close off the squiggly bracket because that should be our first sort of test. Now what we want to do is I'm going to tell it when we want to look for those. So the first thing that we want to look for is when the date is greater than or equal to our start date. So let's do that match right now. So index, open that up, data, comma, match, quotation date, quotation, in titles, comma, false, close that off, and then when it's greater than or equal to the date that we've selected as our start date, which is B4, and then I'll close that off, close off the whole thing. So when I hit enter, what you're going to notice is that it's going to pull out every test one when the date is greater than or equal to our start date. So if I change the start date to something a little bit later, now it's only going to pull out the ones that are greater than or equal to that. Okay, so this is how our formula is going to work, and we're just going to build up our different filters for this. So that's the start date. The next thing that we want is when it's equal to our athlete name. So I'm going to type index, data, comma, comma, match, open that up, athlete name now. The exact same way that you've typed it in your titles, we're going to look for it in titles, and false, and close that off, and we want that when it is equal to the athlete name that we've actually selected. In this case, it's stored in B2, and I'll hit enter. And the reason that that is happening is because we're trying to reference athlete 3, but if we go to our data, athlete 3 doesn't actually have any data. So if I go back to my dashboard and select athlete 1, now we should see all of athlete 1's data. Now the final thing that we want is I want one more condition in there. So I'm going to type comma, index, open that up, data, comma, comma, match. And this time what I want to match for is that the test, okay, so this first test, B5, comma, titles, comma, false, okay, I want to match that is not blank. Okay, so I want to match that there are actually values in that test. Okay, and I hit enter, and it shouldn't actually change anything. Okay, so now you can see that we are pulling out the dates and the test when the date is greater than or equal to the start date, the athlete name matches the athlete name, and the test is not blank. Now the last piece of this is I actually want to pull out test 2 as well. So what I'm going to do is back in my squiggly brackets, that was the first one that we matched for. This is the second one that we're pulling out. I'm going to put one more comma in there and add in our test 2. And we'll do that the same way with index. Open that up, data, comma, comma, match. And this time instead of B5, we're going to match for D5, comma, titles, comma, false. Close that off. And what you'll notice is it's actually going to pull out the second series as well. Okay, so we can pull out multiple series on one filter formula based on all of these conditions. Now the cool thing about that is now we can create our multi graph. So if I were to take this here and hit insert and hit a chart, you can see now we have two series. We have test 1 and test 2. And if we switched any of the parameters, maybe I made it a really late start date, you can see that everything sort of changes. Okay, so I mean that's, there you go, now it changes. So that's the way that we start to do this and build this out. We'll match for two series sort of at the same time on the same set of parameters. Now one last thing, I've used this method before with the multiple series in the same filter formula. And I'm going to just highlight this. So this part here, if you are in a country where you use commas as decimal places, so I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's some of the Spanish speaking countries or some European countries that use commas as decimal places, you're going to have a different set of symbols that go in here. It's not commas. I believe it is semicolons and backslashes that you're going to use in here instead of commas, because you're already using commas in your actual formula. So that's one way that you can fix that up. Okay, so that's going to be part 3. We've come a long way so far. We've started to make our first graph. In the next part, we're going to start to build out our scoring system so that we can scale these values so that they look good no matter what two values we're looking at with each other. Because, for example, if we were to look at something like this, say, I don't know, a 10-meter sprint, and we tried to put these on the same graph, the 10-meter sprint just sits at the bottom because the values are so low, whereas the bench press sits up at the top. So they don't really look great together. So we're going to scale them to a value out of 100 so that we can graph them on the same graph. So we'll do that in the next video. Again, if you're liking these videos, please like and subscribe to the channel because that really helps me out. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you.